Our forum discussion. This one started out with harmony instead of argument because whenever Salih from Turkey is here with his balyama, we'd almost rather hear him play than anything. For the rest of the half hour, though, we do want to compare notes about some of the similarities and differences in different high schools in various parts of the world. Here to help us are 4 students from as many countries. Let me introduce them to you now. From Guatemala, Gisela, Yolanda, Parra. How pretty that sounds, from Guatemala. Gisela is going to be a teacher. She's 17 years old, and she's very much interested, in addition to learning to be a teacher, in swimming and dancing and music. From Australia, Elizabeth Ann Woodgate. Elizabeth Ann is 17. She started out life wanting to be a doctor, but has changed now and is going into the law. From Norway, Johan Holst. Like a good Norwegian, he loves the sea. He's interested in international politics and is going to be a diplomat, but his greatest achievement recently was eating 3 awful offals, one after the other, and getting a special medal that he belongs to the Guzzlers Club of Bloomfield High School. He's the only foreigner to have membership. And Salih Bingol from Turkey, you've already seen. Salih is the musician among us. He's just 17. As a matter of fact, celebrated his 17th birthday last month when he was a guest in New Canaan, Connecticut. Now, the 4 of you are getting to be more or less experts, I should say, on American high schools. Each one of you now has been in 3 different high schools for 2 weeks each, going to school all day long, talking quite a lot, I gather, about your countries and in classrooms. I'd like to know whether you think your education up to now has been superior or inferior to the education of the American friends you've been with.
Well, Australian education has been very different to the American education that I've seen in the high schools here. The students here gain a much broader and more practical education than we do. You have subjects that I've never heard of, current problems, culture, journalism, driver's education, and all those. We don't have them. We have a much more specialised and narrower training at school. But still, I think that average 18-year-old Americans are no more practical than 18-year-old Australians. Even though we don't learn to pull cars apart and drive them in school, we still manage to do it to the same extent.
Well, in Guatemala, I would say that we are both superior and inferior too. Guatemala's education is inferior because here in the United States, you have all kinds of equipment to teach, and there you learn a lot. And I think it's American education. It's much more inferior because you know very little about other countries and other subjects.
Though the American and Turkish educational systems are basically the same, in this basis there are many differences. So that in school, every Turkish student has to take at least 15 subjects, which
15?
are yes, which are required by government. And every year we take the same subjects, but the courses become more advanced as the student progresses.
How about Norway, Johan?
Well, as a matter of fact, I think it's very difficult at such an early stage to just criticize the American school system as a whole, because we have seen such a limited area of the American schools, just within 3 schools, just in this metropolitan area. But so I think they must keep in mind that when we're talking about American schools, we're talking about what we've seen in the metropolitan area. And I think that as far as today, the schools have been, from my point of view, inferior to the Norwegian ones, due to various factors. I think that the American school system is the most socialized school system I ever saw.
Socialized? I wouldn't like that, you know.
No, I know, but to me it's the most socialized school system I ever heard of. They're trying to educate everybody, but everybody is to learn just as little. And I don't know if that's the reason for this is a psychological one, is that the 10th juvenile minds is no good for them to feel superiority or inferiority towards their classmates, that must develop certain complexes, so that must hamper further individual development or so forth, I don't know. But I think the educational system, as I've seen it today, is inferior as far as intellectual standard and knowledge is concerned.
And academic achievement.
Yeah, that's correct.
Well, what do you think the purpose of a high school education should be?
Well, I think it is first to learn the basic principles of subjects, and then to learn to reason and think out problems for oneself.
It's not so at all. I learn in my kids the education teaches how to be good.
Be good.
The purpose of an
point. I didn't think of that. That is.
The purpose of an education is to teach you to be good.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think that's a very good statement.
So do I.
What do you say, Johan? What is the purpose of a high school education?
I agree with both of them that it's to get a wide horizon. But I don't think that everybody is fitted for a mere intellectual education. I think that, currently, I do not believe in high school being compulsory. I think that it should be based on quite a voluntary basis, so that those who didn't want to get an intellectual education, they might, for instance, go to trade schools.
Well,
That's
now, who are these people that ought to have a high school education? You say you don't think everybody should have high school.
Well, those who feel like studying, those who really do like to study, and those who want to make a profession in a field that need a high school education, those who want to go into more practical professions, they don't need that that education, and they must do much better by going to different trade schools so they can learn what they're supposed to use later on.
I assume you've gotten into some arguments with Americans on that point, Johan?
I am.
They changing your opinion any?
Well, to some extent they have, because in the American schools it seems that they have got everything in the same place. They got both trade schools and high schools within the same school. In Norway we separate them. We have what we call continuation schools, and we have got high schools, being quite different. In America you put them together in one school, and of course that's one way of doing it.
What about Turkey, Salih? Do you think everybody should have a high school education?
No matter how highly a person educated is, his education is never completed. So everybody has to take at least high school education. High school education is not necessary for those who wish to enter a vocation.
But you just said that a high school education was necessary for everyone.
Yes, I said,
And then-
I said, let me finish, please.
I'm
High school
sorry.
education may not be necessary for those who wish to enter a vocation, in which the high school education is not as important as practical experience, but it is, of course, necessary for those who wish to enter a high profession and become more cultured.
Johan, do you think it's possible that in Norway, a worker's son, you have to choose at 14, 12 or 14, whether
14, yeah.
Well, do you think it's possible that a worker's son who's never had anybody in his family that has had an education is able to choose at 14?
Yeah, I think so. I think when you come to the age of 14, you more or less have made up your mind in what field you're going to proceed. And I think that if you want to go into a practical subject, you know it then.
Maybe we'll come back to this subject a little later in the series as to who should have a high school education, and you still maintain tonight that you don't think everybody should have.
Well, as a matter of fact, no. Because in a society, you don't need only intellectuals, you need kind of laborers too.
Will you give us a subject for another discussion? Tell me, what subjects do you take? You said you took 15 subjects.
15 subjects, yes. This year I'm taking more than 15, and let me count some of them. First, Turkish literature, Western literature, Turkish grammar, history, geography, psychology, logic, philosophy, and military.
Any science?
Yes, natural science, bacteriology, biology, geology, drawing, don't be afraid, and the history of art.
And you take all those
Yes,
simultaneously?
Yes, all of them.
Hurrah for Turkey.
I can't see how it's possible to learn anything while studying.
No, we don't take all of them in one day. We have 6 periods a day.
That's
For instance,
obviously,
some of 4 days a week.
But anyhow, you
4
can't
hours
get to
a
know anything thoroughly then.
Yes.
And having it
No,
that
at the end of the education, we have a general idea about all of them. Of course,
it's
But
quite...
not
we
very
are
deep.
not. We are not supposed to learn the details, of course.
Well, what about your examinations? Have you, American youngsters recently have been taking college boards. Have you seen any of them? How do your exams compare with the exams high school students here take?
Well, exams here, you have a lot of spot questions. Have you noticed that? And where we have to answer in essay style, and we have an hour to do one question, they have about 20 questions that they answer in an hour. And they're questions like, who wrote Macbeth, Shakespeare or Marlowe, and they just have to make a pot guess, you know. And, and they've got a 50-50 chance, whereas we might have something like, in history, we might have something about the Renaissance. How has the Renaissance affected our modern life? You see, it's not as easy to cheat in our system anyway, that's one thing I can say.
Yeah, I think that's right what you're saying there. And the American examinations, they're based mostly on facts. They're only asking facts. And you don't even particularly have to remember those facts. It's a kind of gambling, as she said.
Yes,
you get 3 possible answers, you check the right one, you get 50-50 chance.
You can't give your ideas as much as you can with us.
But I think it would be a good idea to have some of those spot questions and some long questions too, because that's the way we have them
A
at
kind of
home.
combination,
Yes,
yeah.
we have false or true, but we have...
do have a combination in America.
Do you have a combination here, Mrs. Wallace?
Yes, quite often we do. I want to ask you one more question. What, on this general subject, what do you think about coeducation in America?
Well, when I was in Australia, where we have very little coeducation, there's only one little school in our whole state, I thought that coeducation was a marvellous idea, and I was very pro-coeducation. But now I've come over here, I'm not so sure. I have a feeling that the girls are slightly restricted by the boys over here, and the boys are slightly restricted by the girls. There's a different atmosphere in the classroom to what it was home. That's just my impression so far, you know, having been to a non-coeducational school.
What do you mean by restricted?
Well, they're a little bit frightened to come out with what they really want to say. The girls are a little bit frightened of seeming too intelligent, you know. And I think the boys I think it's rather good for the boys in a way. The classroom mightn't get as rowdy as it might with the girls. You know, they keep the level up a little bit.
How about you, Yolanda?
Well, Mrs. Waller, I have never been in a coeducational school, but I don't like it. I'm completely against it. because, well, you know, in the world it's true, you find men and women, and you have to learn how to speak to them and how to relate to them. But in school, I think at school you come to school to learn, because mostly also, a lot of girls and boys go steady, they say, and they go walking in the halls, holding hands, and I don't think that should be in school. I'm completely against it because of that.
Well, how about you boys? Are you against coeducation? What do you think, Salih?
No, we are not against the coeducation. I can see no apparent reason for the two sexes not to be together in their education, which may give rise to a better world and understanding.
Do you go to a coeducational school at home?
No, I'm not going to a coeducational school, but I am for a coeducational system, because I believe that in our school, I'm speaking by myself, in our school, for instance, if we study together with the girls, I believe that we will study more than before, because when we are with the girls, our moral will be stronger. But there is another thing which I noticed here, that some boys, of course the dating is famous here, some boys are dating with other girls from other schools. I asked the reason, why are you, there are many beautiful girls in your school, why are you dating with other girls from other schools? He said to me that, oh, I see them every day, I hate them, I don't like them. So
That isn't so in my school.
Isn't that so?
No.
I'm for co-education. I go to a co-educational school myself, and I must say I like it very much. Maybe I got too much of it, because in our school we have got 20 girls and 8 boys, so we have a pleasant time. I see your point of view, that you may see that when going to school, the fact that the boys and girls in the school are distracted, for instance, the boys from working as hard. But as a matter of fact, I do not think so. I had the impression myself that it would be that way when coming to a high school. But after having stayed there for 3 months, you get acquainted with it. It's quite natural.
Do you agree with Liz's point that girls are restricted in a coeducational school in the sense that they don't want to appear as intelligent as they really are?
No, I don't think so. Personally, I do like intelligent girls. And I think that we must consider the fact that further in life you have to coexist with girls, or as they cooperate, you have to do in some way.
Now, let's go on to some other similarities and differences between our schools. How do your schools compare to ours, for example, in materials that are used for study in addition to textbooks?
Oh, everything I've seen in America in your laboratories far surpasses anything I've seen home.
Say that in the American way, will you?
Well, everything I've seen...
No, not laboratory, laboratory. So.
Oh, sorry. I didn't know whether you understood. It's funny, some people ask me if we speak American in Australia, you know, that reminds me of that point. But my science mistress would just jump with joy if she had a laboratory. Is that right? As fully as equipped as you have it over here. Electrical apparatus I've seen in some of your labs, it just is unobtainable home and is very expensive. And I really don't think that you lucky Americans appreciate it as much as perhaps we would, you know, not being used to it.
Well, in Guatemala, well, we would be very happy to have all the equipment that you have here in the American schools, because, oh, you learn a lot when you are experimenting it. I went to a school and they had one microscope for every 2 students, and at home we have one microscope for 30 students, and you learn a lot having more microscopes than having only one. In chemistry, the same thing. You have all the stuff to work with, and at home we don't. But teachers do a very good job trying to explain the best they can.
Anything in addition to laboratories? What about Norway?
Well, as a matter of fact, we got all those stuff at laboratories and equipment for such things. So I do think that's a fine thing, but we got that in Norway too. But here in the United States, when teaching things, you use very many things that we don't use. For instance, you use films, you use film strips, you use TV, you use radio. And I do not think that such a, shall say, popularization of the subjects serves to raise intellectual standard. I think that's also a feature of the intellectual socialization in the schools over here.
Tell me, how do you learn about other countries in your schools? More or less the same way we do?
Well, I think in Australia we get a much better perspective of other countries and world events than you do in America, because we're not such an important, comparatively, we're not such an important power in world politics as you are. And I really do feel that we see outside ourselves more than the Americans do, because they're such a world power.
What would you say, Johan, from Norway?
Well, I can agree with her to a certain extent. But I think that in Norway we do know a lot more about the outer world than you do. As a matter of fact, I think that the American system is a splendid isolationistic one, because in the American schools, in the senior high school, they do not teach geography at all. The students are quite ignorant about the outer world. And the way they teach language is, oh, boy, that's quite a way. The teaching of language is minimal. They teach us languages the same way as they teach us Latin, which is not supposed to be speaking, you know. And also, for instance, like I mentioned from German, I visited 3 schools, and all those 3 schools, they taught German with Gothic letters, which, as far as I know, they ceased to use in Germany in 1933. So I think that's quite an obsolete way of introducing
Now, let's
language.
get more specific. Have you found teaching about your own country accurate in the schools you visited here?
Well, what they've taught about Australia has been pretty accurate, but I found that most of the high school students are under the impression that we're overrun with kangaroos, koala bears and rabbits, and that's about all. But I don't resent this at all, because I realise that we're not as important as other countries, and that's why I do feel lucky living in Australia and not America from the educational point of view, because we learn about all these leading countries as well as about our own, you see. And I think that we learn ever so much more about America than America learns about Australia. And also, we learn less about Australia than America learns about America.
How about Norway, Johan?
Well, I think it's pretty much the same, that they ought to learn a little more about our countries. And the thing that I want the Americans to learn about our country, I've been accused, to every school I visit, I've been accused of being a communist due to the fact that we have what they call a socialistic government. And I would appreciate very much if the Americans got to know the difference between communism and socialism, that they are not synonyms. That I'll appreciate very much.
Salih, is teaching about Turkey accurate in the schools you've been in?
To be exact, they don't know much about Turkey, but they know the name of Turkey. And in Turkey, I heard that foreigners don't know much about Turkey. But when I came here, I saw that the people who knows Turkey knows exactly, really. And I'm very happy because of that. But we stress great importance to general knowledge and international subjects, so we learn many things about our countries. We repeat first, for instance, the world geography 3 times in our education, and I want to mention this, that we learn about other countries before ourselves.
How about Guatemala?
Well, I really couldn't say that in the United States you study about Guatemala, because really you don't. You study North America, South America, but you never study about Central America. And well, at least we appreciate very much that all the American people will know where Guatemala is, at least, because many people don't know where it's. But I realize that you don't, it's such a small country, but it's very big for me. And well, other thing that we appreciate, it's that American people think that in Guatemala you will only find Indians. And really no, because 50% of the population is Indian. And well, we have buildings and streets and cars too.
What would you most like Americans to know about your country that you feel the students in the schools you've been in do not know?
Well, first of all, I want that the Americans must know my country is a modernized democratic country where communism can never leave, and as it is not considered as an ideology.
Well, I'd like them to know that Australia is as big as the United States, in area at least.
Have you got anything to add to your wish, Johan?
No, I think if they only knew that we got a democratic form of government, I'd be satisfied. And I don't appreciate that I say that Sweden is the capital of Norway.
Now come back to some of the differences between your schools and ours. Are there any differences, for example, in relations between teachers and students?
Well, in Australia, there's only really a superficial difference to what you do in America. Like when the teacher comes in the room, we all stand up, you know, and we don't sit down until we're told, and then we sit down. And when the mistress, I'm beginning to call it teacher like you do in America, you know, we always stand up when she speaks to us. But fundamentally, I think that the relationship is very similar. We are just as good friends with our mistresses, and I'm in correspondence now. I'm over here with some of mine. You know, they're just like second mothers to me.
What would you say to this, Yolanda, from Guatemala?
Well, in Guatemala, the teachers are our friends. Not with a boy from Europe. I was talking to him, and he said, "Oh, I hate teachers. Teachers are our enemies. We don't like them." But in Guatemala, they're very friendly to us. And we respect them very much, too, because we realize that teachers have the key to civilization, and we have to respect them, because without them, we wouldn't go anywhere. And that's why, in the same as Australia, we consider them as our second parents, and we respect them very much.
Now, what about other differences? What about sports?
Well, I think that home, because perhaps we don't have coeducation, the girls play sports much more than they do here. I've noticed here that they prefer to watch the boys play sport than actually play themselves, and of course that I don't like. I much prefer playing myself, you know, swinging a hockey stick myself rather than watch the boys play basketball. And by the way, the boys don't play basketball home very much. They consider it a bit sissy.
Well, what would you say, maybe this is too hard a question, but we're asking it because we really want to know your answers. As you have seen the schools here, from your point of view, what would you say is the chief weakness in our high school?
Well,
it's pretty difficult to answer.
Yes, I think that perhaps it's that the students don't read books as much as they do home. That might be because of television, and when we get television, it will probably be the same in Australia. And also, in your so-called classless society, I wonder why you don't wear uniform to school. Because everywhere we wear uniform to school because we think that class distinction comes too soon in life, you see. And that with a uniform, no one's better than anyone else. And you go to school and you don't unconsciously form groups like you might if some people are dressed better than others. That's just what I feel coming over to here, where you haven't got uniform.
I think that the uniform, that's a terrible system. That will make...
You think, oh, but have you ever been where there is uniform?
No, I've seen Russian uniforms, how Russian kids
no,
are dressed at
please,
school, and that's terrible. I don't want to be dressed at school like all the other kids. I feel that the way you're dressed, that reflects a certain traits of your
Yes, but
character.
we don't need our clothes to reflect our personality. We've got
yes.
strong enough personalities, you see, to bring them out.
And
Without
here,
our
for
clothes.
instance, the girls have the trouble. What shall I put on? The pink blouse. Oh, that's not
yes,
good.
yes.
And they go running. Mama, my blouse is not ironed. Will you please iron it for me? And I don't think
And
that's
we have
nice.
very attractive uniforms. They're grey with powder.
2 points there, then. You think we should wear uniforms,
No.
and you think
yes.
our students don't read enough,
That's right.
and you've already said not enough respect to teachers. Anything else, Johan?
Well, like, some practical things, for instance, that in Norway we have 10 minutes breaks between each period that the students get opportunities of getting some fresh air, and I think that's pretty important for what they're going to do in the next period. I think that's one of the things they ought to do in the American schools.
I think they should do it in Australian schools too.
Yeah.
Now, can we go on to, is there any feature of American schools that you would like to see adopted in your own schools?
Oh yes, I would like to have all the right equipment introduced in Guatemala, because that's wonderful.
Such as laboratory equipment and
Yes,
so on.
that's
How about
right.
you, Liz?
Yes, I'd like to second Yolanda. If we had the equipment you had, it would just be a wonderful home.
Salih, what would you say?
I would like to say that we go to school 6 days besides Sunday. I wanted Saturdays must be holiday. And we must have vocational training in the schools, because in general schools we have vocational training, and I want that students must have a choice in the first grades or high school for their life, for their later life.
Your 15 subjects a year are obligatory until you get in your last year of high school?
Yes, yes. So we have only one choice in the last grade, either scientific or literature branch. Yes.
How about you, Johan?
Well,
Anything in American schools you'd like to see here?
Well, I can mention 2 things. That's 2 subjects. That's first of all, these kind events that you emphasize to a very great extent over here, and I think that's very important. I wish we did that at home in Norway too. As a matter of fact, I think that the general American boy and girl, they know more about the politics and than the Norwegian girls and boys, especially as far as the girls are concerned. And also I would like to have introduced in our schools public speaking, which I think is very, very important.
Any final word we've got to summarize now?
Well, I can say that when I went to America, I thought that the schools over here were terrible. They just emphasize social life and sports. But as a matter of fact, they are very good, I think, as far from distinct from that. As a matter of fact, I think that in the American schools, they're trying to adopt certain European methods in their educational system. And on the other hand, the European schools are trying to adopt American methods. So you see that kind of collaboration will make the best improvement, I think.
Thank you very much, Johan. And you, Yolanda. Thank you, Liz. And thank you, Salih. And next week, at this time, we'll be having a discussion on the pros and cons of NATO and the other regional pacts.